Good evening. Today is Friday, March 12th. I'd like to begin by thanking Victor for all his hard work, advice, wisdom, and of course, great market predictions.
Oh,
As
thank you. But success is a very ephemeral thing.
yes, but
And
nonetheless, today is our 3 month anniversary. So since we started,
yep, perhaps someone will read it. Someone will listen to it eventually. If we get 30 in a row correct, maybe
wow,
someone
that
will.
that that would be a record.
Mm, two in a row would be a record.
Well, you had definitely many in a row today, including. But like you said, maybe you just got lucky yet again today because the
Complete
market,
lucky. An athlete, when he wins in a racket sport, is always supposed to say, "He's lucky. I was lucky. Can I get you a drink?" How's Soros? That's his squash thing. And you played well. I was lucky.
so you were lucky again today as the market closed positive after
Mm,
a surge in the last final end of the day,
certainly didn't look that way most of the day.
right? But 3,900 level around was a good buy level,
And we closed near a Soji level.
right?
A lot of Soji levels around. Bitcoin is a little above the Soji level at 56,000.
Right. Bitcoin sold off a little bit today, as other crypto did, because there were some headlines that CFTC was investigating one of the exchanges, Bitfinance, because they're doing some derivative trading or something like that.
We should
But
all have listened to Andy Aiken when he told us to buy all the Bitcoins at 20,000. What was his other prediction?
the other cryptocurrency, Ethereum,
Oh, yeah.
also is up manifold. And Ethereum now is even more popular because of the all of the NFT, non-fungible tokens, art sales. As more people are jumping on the bandwagon, for example, Patrick Mahomes, one of the obviously NFL's highest profile players, is just launching his own NFT art gallery. It will be modestly called the Museum of Mahomes. He is the second professional athlete who is jumping into the world of NFT after Rob Gronkowski of Tampa Bay.
Well, that's very woke. Everything was woke today. That's why it went up.
Right, everything was woke. For example, family of George Floyd settled his death with Minneapolis for 27 million. I'd like to see the math on that settlement.
Yeah, hopefully the family will get something over and above what's paid to the lawyers.
All right.
There's been quite a bit of information about that case. I think it's very good that they settled it. If it weren't for the publicity, there might be a hung verdict on that one. Apparently, George Floyd was very much on some lethal drugs beforehand, and the policemen were acting in the normal fashion. They've been trying to subdue him for an hour before the knee was on the. Any case, go on. It was very everything was woke to me. The most woke thing was the Secretary of Defense taking out after Fox News and saying that they should be punished for raising the question of whether diversity in the Defense Department was going too far. As was pointed out, there are more armed forces in Washington protecting the capital than there are in Afghanistan. It's good to see that the Secretary of Defense is developing an all-court press against conservative news media. It's part of the reason the market went up. Is everything was very woke, and seventh accuser for Governor Cuomo.
Right. And now Ocasio-Cortez wants blood and calls for his resignation as well. Meanwhile, Russell was up 12.5% since the lows last Friday, a week ago.
Wow, that's amazing.
Making new high, as Nasdaq is underperforming, as technology, Tesla, and all other ARK ETF holdings are still way below the previous highs.
Okay, I have something that's not woke. I have a real prediction.
All right.
I looked to see all the occasions when S&P was up on a 2.5 month, 3 month basis, and Nasdaq was down in the last 12 years. It's happened 100 times. And the amazing thing is that in 90% of the cases, the S&P has gone up 60 days later. 91% of the time, actually. And hasn't been that bad for Nasdaq either. Nasdaq's up a lot less than the S&P. It's up about 2/3 of the time. So the intuitive thinking that because Nasdaq has done much better than S&P in the last 10 years, and that that it's a good time to reverse and go back into Nasdaq rather than S&P, since the S&P is up about 4 or 5% versus Nasdaq being down 1%. So the 6% divergence. Anyway, that divergence tends to continue. At least it has in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I guess more important than that, everybody's concerned with the bonds. The bonds are
Right.
bonds were at a new 1-year low. The bond vigilantes are moving their trades into going down. Bonds was down 2 points. We hit a 156 handle on the March bonds.
Another yellow day.
And you might think that would be very bearish for the S&P, but it isn't. It's neutral. There are a lot of cross currents right now. I guess the 30-year rate must be 2.45% now, maybe 2.5% eventually. Eventually, the earnings price ratio is only going to be 1.5% higher than the 30-year bond. I'd say bonds have another 0.5% to go before they start impacting stocks down. Anyway, the numbers are not bearish for stocks based upon the bond movement.
When you're saying earnings to price ratio, do you mean PE ratio, the standard PE ratio, or is the reverse?
The inverse. You shouldn't use a PE ratio. Only people who don't know how to deal with negative numbers like Schiller use the PE ratio, because when earnings are negative, then the PE ratio becomes discontinuous and it explodes. But if the PE ratio is 20, then the earnings price ratio is 5%. It's the inverse of the PE ratio, the opposite.
Right. I just wanted to double check that because it's very so rarely used, and most people use the PE ratio. Right.
Except when a company has negative earnings,
Right.
which it often did in the data that Schiller uses to come up with his cockamamie ideas that you should use the 10-year average of earnings to come up with a PE ratio. In any case, those are that's what the numbers say. The numbers are very bullish for the 60-day S&P, and we had what I call interruptus, had stock market interruptus the last few days. It looked like it was going to an orgasmic new high at 39.54. It reached the climax above 39.54, but then fell back 2 days in a row. This creates a lot of frustration among men. We will soon see interruptus stopped. See a new high. We were up 4 days in a row. Gold was up 4 days in a row. Bonds are at a new low. Everything was woke today.
Right. Even our great leader's speech was very woke. In yesterday's speech,
Yeah,
our
well,
great leader said that if we all behave and get vaccines, we can actually, he would allow us to see our family again by 4th of July, but only in small groups, because apparently the virus will be watching and counting.
Dr. Cattle was on the air again. He for 4 years he hasn't said anything that hasn't hurt the Reds along. He was saying that the Trump administration didn't prepare
Right.
properly, didn't prepare a vaccine. They spent $20 billion to jumpstart 5 companies producing the vaccine, and they had it a few weeks before the election. And of course, they didn't.
Not to mention all the regulations and FDA and all other red tape that they had to help them cut to get through to the finish line.
So that was very woke that Dr. Dr. Cattle is their main advisor there. And oh yes, and of course, the right to work bills, that's crazy. I mean, an employee of a firm that's unionized will not be able to opt out on paying union bills. He won't have the right to work where he wants, and that's a very, very important, very important reason why the market went up. It was very, very woke. So we have the Defense Department, the National Guard, the Dr. Cattle. Oh yeah, and we were back again. It was like the frog in hot water. If you start them out in lukewarm water and you have a gradual warming of the water, and you won't jump out. So if the market wanted to force you out of the buys before it would have some erratic days. Today was like one of the quietest days in the history of the market in the last few months, a few weeks. And it's kind of day that the CME doesn't like, because they didn't force any excessive trading, any excessive any excessive vig. Public was not forced out of the market. How did the public favorites do? How did the GameStop do today?
It didn't really do much
Hmm.
today. Closed up at 264, up 2% or so. So another day of not much movement. I guess they have sold those high volatility options to the retail, and now they're keeping the stock on hold, so just to collect the theta premium.
Oh, don't be so cynical. Don't be so cynical. The market's purpose is to create excessive vig, to create churning, to create volume. When they have a day like this where volume must have been about half of the usual level today, they'll have to have some very exciting, some very gyrational moves next week. They can't just have a slow, steady. Rosewall used to play tennis and he'd stay back and he'd hit ground strokes and play very, very steady. In my day, a lot of players, they didn't play like the modern boys who hit for the lines and hit with tremendous topspin and hit so hard from the baseline that the opposing person can't come up to net. But the market was like that, very slow and steady, sort of an old-fashioned. By the way, the one bearish thing that wasn't woke is that Federer lost, and Federer is bullish for the market, and when he loses, it's bad. He lost in Dubai in a very, very fine match.
He's a great player. It's a fun to watch.
Oh, he sure is. He sure is. I think he's the best ever. I've been saying for 10 years that I thought Nadal would gradually be so injured and his strokes are so bad that he would eventually recede to the bottom. And I've been very wrong. In fact, the game has changed so much that even though I used to know everything about all racket sports, and Hobo Keeley said I was the best racket player of all time, now everything that I knew from 40 years ago seems to be untrue. Ever-changing cycles in sports and the market. Everything's have to be open to change. That's why I was very surprised to see that the fact that S&P is performing well above Nasdaq. I thought that would be bearish for the S&P, but no, it's bullish. And the same thing. Had hundreds of people contact me saying, bonds, bonds, bonds. How can you be bullish when bonds are going down? Well, that leads me to the one most important lesson that our readers, our listeners should have. Have you tested that? Have you looked to see what happens when bonds are down 1.5 and stocks are up 10 points? Yes, I have tested it. Okay, let's end with one letter I was going to read. It's sort of, we've been talking about how the three greatest composers of the 19th century had no children. Beethoven had no children. Brahms had no children. And Verdi had children, but for the last 40 years of his life, he didn't. And I had a letter that I wanted to read about. In my family, there's a tradition of the fathers helping their children when the principals are very much against the children, and my father helped me. And my grandfather wrote a very famous letter to the football coach. In the old days, Brooklyn College, my father was a quarterback on, used to lose every game like 80 to -3, 80 to 2. All the Catholic schools would pay Brooklyn College a tremendous amount of money, $500 to come to Indiana, and then they'd kill the Jewish boys from Brooklyn. Anyway, my grandfather wrote a letter to the coach. He says, when you have an All-American like Artie Niederhofer, who can play both ways, why do you take him out of the game? And the coach coach read that letter in the locker room, and my father was the butt of jokes for 4 years, and then 20 years later, I was in those days the biggest and the most the fanciest seafood restaurant in Brighton Beach that everyone who was in the lower middle class aspired to was called Lundy's. You probably passed it when you were in Brighton Beach. Anyway, one day my parents had enough money. In those days, a policeman's salary was $4,500 a year. So one day we were at Lundy's, and one of his former teammates comes up to him and says, "Hey, All-American, how you doing?" Still, and because I thought we'd end with one more. I'll read that letter next time. Here's a tone whistle. When you lose, it's a tragedy. When you draw, it's a comedy. And when you win, it's wonderful musical. So enjoy all the plays. A winning move made out of order often means you have just snatched defeat from the jaws of the victory. Success depends upon the proper succession. Yeah, that's right. So those who think that just because bonds are way down, it's time, because in 1987, tremendous decline in bonds, a tremendous increase in yields in bonds, I think went up to around 7 or 8%, while stocks kept going up. So everybody remembers 1987, and exactly just because it was vivid and that in everybody's mind, high yields create future bearish stock market. That's exactly when you have to change the order and test it. Don't follow the conventional wisdom. All right, you have anything else to say?
Well, on the health news in Europe, they seem to be scared of coronavirus again, and Italy is having a new series of lockdowns. They're approving new restrictions on travel and businesses for Easter, and Germany thinks that they're at the start of the third coronavirus wave. So it's not just in US that we have problems. And also in Europe, many countries have joined to stop using the Astra vaccines because they have side effect of blood clots.
All the lockdowns will continue. It's in the government's interests to reduce individual freedom and to increase their control over the public, and to get the public used to having the government determine all their activities, all their choices. So that's
Right,
why
just like our president said last night, that he will issue further guidance on what you can and cannot do once fully vaccinated. And
Well,
I
I'm
think
sure
the choice of words is kind of interesting. Not what you should or shouldn't do, but what you can and cannot do.
what was most woke and what was most bullish about what he said was how he took credit for the vaccine. And
Right. Not even a shred of sharing credit.
thank you, Ms. Sennett.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.